Blast off. All right, we're recording. Cool. Audience, fans, friends, whoever, beings of an indeterminate species. This is season 13, episode 11 of season 13, and we are doing 4X in space. So we brought back Sam, we brought back OJ's dad. BB Mike is returned to co-hosting duties after bowing out for a couple of weeks there, and we're going to talk some 4X space stuff because it's been a little while since we've covered some of those games. There's been a couple of neat developments, a couple of new games, a couple of DLCs come out, and everybody's got a little bit of playing under their belt. Plus, we've got a couple of kind of interesting and different Kickstarters and pre-orders and new releases in the tabletop 4X space as well. As we are recording this, Stellar Horizons is out there. I think it's on Kickstarter. Mike, do you remember, is Stellar Horizons out on Kickstarter right now from Compass?
Stellar Horizons 2 is out.
Stellar Horizons 2, thank you. And then there's a Star Trek Ascendancy game that's on GameFound right now. So there's a couple of these floating around out there that...
By the way, I hate you for bringing that one to my attention.
Well, look, it's going to get here before the Stellaris board game is.
Yeah, not wrong.
Yeah, the Earth might crash into the sun before the Stellaris board game gets here. So from left to right on your radio dial, you've just heard Sam in the background there. Sam, you got to actually talk into the mic instead of just sort of in the same room with the mic so that we can actually hear you. You there?
Yep, I'm here.
All right, he's there. So Sam is back. He is our resident 4X expert, especially the space stuff. OJ's dad is back because he enjoys these kinds of games too, and his schedule worked out that he could join us. OJ, welcome back.
Thank you.
This is the first time you've been here this season, isn't it?
No, I was on last month when we were talking. What was it, Mike? What were we talking about?
You were once before, yeah.
Rocky Mountain Navy was on.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. My bad.
What did we talk about? I don't remember what we talked about.
I think that was the FOMO episode.
Yeah, and then I don't remember what we were talking about. Dang it!
I think it was the FOMO episode, the one about fear of missing out.
That could be.
So,
and then before that was the Compass catalog. Compass catalog review.
Yeah, which was last year. And then Mike is back. Mike has made far more of these episodes than he has missed this season, which is kind of cool. So, Mike, appreciate you, living up to the co-host title there. It's great.
Yeah, and we're on episode 11 now. So how many are left in this season?
We've just got 2 left. We're next week we're going to talk to the folks from a bunch of the folks that went to SD HISCON and kind of get some feedback and a back brief on that. So as people are listening to it, SD HISCON will be like almost a month in the rearview mirror. But we did want to get a good debrief from those guys on that event and what they thought and how they enjoyed it. And then we'll wrap up with our season finale and, kind of figure out something cool to do there.
And leave the big cliffhanger, no doubt.
Maybe. We'll take it under advisement. So before we dig into too many specific games in one place or another, I did actually prepare a minor amount. Mike will be proud of me. I actually prepared at least a minor amount for going into one of these podcasts. I have a specific Space 4X question that applies to both tabletop and computer-based games, but also applies to damn near any sci-fi franchise you see on TV or movies or anything else like that. And Sam, I'm going to start with you and let you try and give your best answer, and then we'll sort of work our way around the room here. But here on Earth, we've got deserts, we've got tundra, we've got Volcanoes National Park, we've got jungles, we've got swamps, we've got high mountain plains, we've got big cities, we got little itty bitty towns. OJ lives in one of those, or near one of those. And yet, whenever you go to any sort of sci-fi setting ever, it's the ocean world, it's the frozen world, it's the desert world, it's the volcano. Every one of these planets out there is a single biome when we've got like 14 different distinct biomes just on this one planet. What the heck, man? Like, can we not get a little bit of biodiversity on a single planet somewhere else?
So clearly Brant doesn't play these games we're about to talk about. Because I've never encountered a Space 4X game that only has planets with one biome. I mean, all one biome, I should say.
Well, I'm again, just looking at some of I don't play a ton of the Space 4X games. I've played a couple of the tabletop ones a little bit here and there over the years. But I've been a fan of a variety of these sci-fi TV and movie franchises over the years. Star Wars is one of the most egregious offenders of this whole thing, where Tatooine was the desert planet and Hoth is the ice planet and Coruscant is the city planet and Dagobah is the swamp planet. What the heck? Like,
Yeah, look
how often do these things show up?
Look at our solar system. All of our other planets are one biome.
Yes, and have zero people living on them that we know of.
Well, some people will tell you different. Yes.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Dr. Manhattan's walking around on Mars, with his little clockwork walking gadget machine thing.
I'll say this, and Sam, you jump in here if I get this completely wrong, but just thinking about Stellaris and Distant Worlds too, right? You may have a volcano planet, but that's more there to deal with the population as to who can settle the planet. It doesn't really affect the gameplay from a point of view of what you can build on the planets. There may be some exceptions there, but for the most part, it just has to do with colonization of what species can prefer those habitats, those biomes.
Yep, I would agree with that. Yeah, in PC computer 4X games, it tends to do more with gameplay, where certain races have an advantage settling on these types of planets, volcanic or desert or ice, whatever. Whereas, sure, in literature, in movies and TV, there it's more about the tropes.
Yeah. And to be honest, Brant, I've been thinking about this with Civilization series, right?
Okay.
I look at my little county here, which is about 400 square miles, about 20 by 20. A lot of farmland. We have a city with a bunch of industries in it. We have arts and education. We have a couple one university, community college and stuff. But think about what you do in Civ. One hex can only do one thing.
Yes.
You don't go and build an agricultural district that also has some commerce, that also has some doesn't have anything else. It's a farming district. It's an industrial hex. So it's not just limited to 4X games that does this.
No. Look, I get that the space games are not the only ones that have some oddities to them. When you're talking the historical Civ games, like the Civ series games, if you add up all of the hexes at the circumference of the planet for a large map for Civ 6, I think somebody worked out that it's, like 900 miles per hex or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was a large number of miles per hex. And yet you've got archers that can shoot into the next hex. So you have the 900-mile longbow.
But my point there is, as we were just saying, though, the type of planet really doesn't impact what you can do on the planet once you get it settled. It may impact your population's ability to grow and be happy, but that doesn't impact, oh, hey, I've got more mines, or I've got more of this or more of that.
No, that does make sense. I could totally see
especially in Distant Worlds 2, where you don't control your economy to the scale that you do in other 4X games. That's really behind the scenes.
Yeah. No, that does totally make sense. The idea of sort of trying to align racial preferences or species preferences, probably more accurate, species preference to a particular type of biome or planet or atmosphere or whatever. Totally get that. That would make perfect sense. I just, it's something that's always kind of been in the back of my mind watching, a variety of these sci-fi franchises, but was just sort of curious what the backstory might be with regards to the game types. And I figured I would do a little bit of due diligence ahead of the podcast and find a question I could bring to the table. And so I've now checked that block.
I think you do have a point, though, Brant. There is kind of I guess like a trope of that sort of thing taking place. And I think we see it in these sci-fi games because you have planets like Hoth and Dune and the desert world and the ocean worlds. And I think people want to see those in these sci-fi games. It'd be like if you didn't put an ice planet in, somebody's going to say, hey, where's the ice planet? Where's Hoth? Where's Dagobah?
Well, I think it's a simplicity thing, right? So I'm race X, and we developed from a volcanic planet, right? Therefore, I'm going to look for similar type planets that I'm more naturally able to adapt to, right? But if you go other game to avoid that, then you got to start looking at things like oxygen levels in the atmosphere, gravity. You got to put on different factors, and that I think would complicate things an awful lot.
Yeah, that could well be. I could see a tabletop game not wanting to wrestle with that complexity. At a certain point, you have the computing power of, sort of crunching the computing power there to help do that in a digital game. But depending on how big that digital game is, that might just be a little much.
Well, I think where it really comes down to, though, is what kind of game are you targeting for your players? Is it a game where, hey, maybe 5% of the planets in the galaxy of 1,000 star systems you can colonize? Or do you want them to be able to naturally fit pretty easily into 20%?
Yeah.
Tall versus wide is the saying, right? Which do you prefer, and how are you going to go with that? And Sam or Mike, you guys can jump in and tell me I'm an idiot. But
well, you're right. And as you play some of these games and you advance in technology, then suddenly you reach a point where you can colonize anything or terraform anything to your race's desires. So you kind of everything's open game at that point.
Yeah, and it's really kind of early versus later game, right? Mid and late game.
Yeah,
as you just said, right? Do you want them to be able to colonize 100% of the planets they come across early in the game, or do you want them to have to really work toward it?
Yeah,
if they choose to.
Exactly.
And then there's like in the Galactic Civilization series, you not only have Earth type like planets, you have what they call Gaia worlds, which are like, they're really Earth like and beyond. They're like the perfect place to live and grow your colonies. So you get all these bonuses and all these benefits for finding one of those rare worlds.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. With that out of the way, Sam, you have been playing with some new Distant Worlds 2 content from our buddies over at Slytherin and Matrix. Look, we sort of jokingly refer to them as S&M, but things either release under Slytherin or under the Matrix banner. And I think Distant Worlds 2 flies the Matrix flag. Is that correct?
I believe so. Yes. Yeah. I know the game's forums is still under the Matrix forums, at least.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. So you've got your hands on some of the more recent DLC.
Yep.
Talk to us a little bit about what it is, what it introduces, and what you've been able to dig into so far, which I know isn't everything because there's a lot there, but talk to us.
So the most recent, this new DLC is the Return of the Shaktari. I never quite pronounce it correctly. And that is the end game crisis in Distant Worlds. The Shaktari were an ancient threat that came through the galaxy once thousands of years ago and basically wrecked everything, and were only stopped at great cost by the old empires, who then themselves kind of fell back into a great dark age across the galaxy, and now they're coming back. And so all the new empires that have arisen since then will have to deal with that. But it's currently playing. I haven't played far enough to encounter the Shaktari yet. I've come across certain hints and clues about the great darkness that once came and that might be coming again, but I haven't encountered them directly as of yet. But that's not all, of course, that the DLC adds. There's also some other new features, one of which is outposts, where they're sort of like mini colonies in a way. And what they really allow you to do is to allow you to claim a system, which also allows you to extend your empire's range without having to deal with the headache and expense of setting up a full-fledged colony.
Okay.
And so, I mean, so it's a nice. It gives you options for expanding your empire, and especially when you can build an outpost on, and especially in the early mid game, it's a good way to be able to you can build an outpost on any kind of planet, even on a planet that your race normally can't colonize. Which in the early game, you basically can't colonize anything yet. Aside from your own biome.
Those darn biomes again. Man, They just screw everything up.
Yes, they do. so that is very handy. And then the game also has added the DLC has also added the ability to form multi-party alliances with other empires, somewhat similar to federations in Stellaris, where you can coordinate with each other, form with other empires, and in coordinating targets during wartime, and you have to vote with, and whether or not you declare war on someone, there has to be a vote on that. You can admit other members to your alliance, kick people out of said alliance, and that sort of thing. And then there's other benefits too that you gain from being in an alliance with other empires.
So it's a legit multipolar alliance, not just a whole series of interconnected bilateral ones.
Exactly. Yes.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. I mean, you could think of it kind of like NATO in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, totally. That makes perfect sense, because I know in the Civ series, as far as we've gotten, and OJ and I have in a couple of multiplayer Civ games together, you have a whole lot of bilateral. You've got an interlocking web of bilateral alliances where. If you're allied with somebody and somebody else is allied with that somebody, then you declare war on the wrong person, and the whole string of alliances then starts to trigger.
Yeah. And it's something you get a reminder a little bit of just how World War I kicked off.
Yes, you very much do. So, that's interesting. Anything else in particular in the new DLC that you've run across in the week and a half or so that you've been poking around at it so far?
Not in the DLC really. In the base, the main game also got updated, received a big update alongside the DLC. The UI got cleaned up and revamped a little bit, and that's been nice to see. They've done some improvement there. And compared to the last time I really did a go through with Distant Worlds 2, I'm actually finally enjoying it now.
That's good, since that's the goal.
Yeah, for probably the first time, to be honest.
I know early on you were a little hard on how rough Distant Worlds 2 was when it first released. And OJ, if I recall, you had poked around with Distant Worlds 2 right after it came out. And I mean, that was a couple of years ago now, that you thought there were a couple of rough edges that could use some sanding as well. Am I recalling that correctly?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
So, since you had originally poked around with it way back when, have you had a chance to come back around and revisit it at all, or have you just moved on to some other games?
I have not. It is on my list to try and get back into this year. I'll probably wait until I pick up the new DLC. And once I do that, then I'll jump back into it again.
All right.
I just haven't had a chance to focus in on it again.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're on YouTube 3 nights a week playing games with Ozarski, so
At least 2.
Yeah. So it's not like you're not doing any other gaming.
Yeah, I did a couple weeks ago finish up my last college course, so I got that off my back. So now I can maybe. And what did I exchange that for? Somebody roped me into playing 3 campaign level games of World War I off the WDS series. So playing France, Eastern Front, and Serbia campaigns, and just trying to get through the first turns of France, moving all your units is like a half an hour. And that's with the AI moving them for you, because you've already told them where you want to go.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of dudes out there, man.
Yeah. And we haven't even hardly gotten into any combat yet.
Yeah. Wow.
No, once I pick up the new DLC, I will put my toe back into it for sure.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Mike, BB Mike, and multiple mics on right, but Mike, I don't suppose you've noodled around with any of the digital Space 4X ones at all much, have you?
A little bit. So actually, as Sam was talking, I was peeking at my Steam library to see if I actually owned a copy of Distant World 2, and I do. And I remembered that Sam was kind of cold on it when it first came out. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to put this. Not even going to look at it until he blesses it, because he's kind of the Obi-Wan for these games for me. He says it's okay, I'm going to play it. See what I did there with the Obi-Wan? Yeah, if he says it's okay, I'm probably going to try it. So now it sounds like I might be able to dip my toe into Distant Worlds 2.
A couple of things I was also going to say about about Distant Worlds 2 now. Number one, the price on the Return of the Shack 3, I think it's like $20. That was far more reasonable than I was expecting. Considering the content that they're adding, and that was, I got to give kudos to Slither and the Matrix for that. But also, as far as the main game goes, they've definitely done some improvement to the AI automation and the advisor system. My critiquing about where they want me to send my colony ships aside, There, it's and the fleet automation. It's clearly a lot better than it was 2 years ago at launch, because I know that was one thing that just it felt bad, quite frankly, at the time.
So let me ask a technical question with regards to those improvements and those changes. In order to get those improvements and changes, do you have to get the most recent DLC or DLCs, plural, as appropriate, or have they updated the core engine such that there's just sort of a patch or an update to that base engine that you can go grab if you've already bought the game, and you're going to get some of those gameplay enhancements without having to also layer on the other things the DLC brings into the game?
You don't need to get any of the DLC. This is all stuff that was updated to the base game, to the main game.
All right. Well, that's kind of cool, and I'm sure that's a little heartening for the folks that did buy the base game and then maybe, like OJ, sort of walked away for a while and now may be interested in coming back, to know that just the base game itself has, in fact, improved some.
Yeah, the Distant Worlds 2 does still feel a bit slower paced than Distant Worlds 1, but overall it feels very close to my experience, to how I felt when I played the first Distant Worlds game, and to me that's a good thing.
All right. No, that's cool. Just show of hands, is anybody at all surprised that Mike has the game in the Steam library and the total number of hours played is in the single digits? Anybody surprised by that?
You mean did I have it in my Steam library?
Yeah, didn't you already have it in your Steam library? And
Actually, just to kind of tell how many hours I play, I'll look that up. It's probably 0, because I think I had literally bought it and read what Sam had said, and I was like, I think I can wait on this one. I played the first one, and it was okay, but it felt too micromanagey to me. And I know you can turn a lot of that stuff off and play it like, something like EU4, but it just didn't grab me as much. So that was the other factor.
Well,
yeah.
And keep in mind, there's a huge difference between Stellaris and Distant Worlds 2's franchise.
Oh, yes.
Distant Worlds 2 is like playing Old Earth Wet Navy, where you're got colonies and you're building a navy to work and protect the shipping lines, because you actually have freighters and passenger ships that's all automated, but they're moving back and forth. You have planets that have certain resources that you need to guard, otherwise somebody can send a raiding fleet in and destroy your mining facilities, and all of a sudden you don't have those resources. Stellaris is all I'm sorry, let me back up for a second. Distant Worlds 2 is all open space. It's all faster than light travel in between systems. Stellaris is all wormholes, so you can build up really heavy defensive systems and block a lot of that stuff, and it's a lot more focused on you developing each planet. Distant Worlds 2 isn't really so much you developing it, but the AI developing it for you. And so they're Distant Worlds 2 is also a lot more heavy story driven, I think, than Stellaris.
I don't know that it's more story driven, although I think I see what you're getting at.
I think there's a couple things, right? In Stellaris, you can build a really unique race from scratch.
Yes.
In Distant Worlds 2, you don't have a lot of flexibility on your race. You have, okay, here's humans, here's this race, here's that race, but you don't really have a whole lot of impact on making them totally unique from the ground up like you do in Stellaris. It's not a bad thing. It's just you have to go into it. You can't be a Stellaris player and go into Distant Worlds 2 and think that you're getting a clone and vice versa, right? They are two very different games, I think, in how they focus on things.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a bad thing. It's just you have to realize that going into them.
Yes. Well, the races in Distant Worlds 2 they were basically individually made by the developers and therefore much more distinct. Each race has their own unique technologies and certain unique abilities that the other races do not have and don't have access to.
Yes.
And so they are going to play a little bit. They're definitely going to play a little bit different.
You would hope so. Otherwise, why have both of them if they're just going to be the same thing over again? So I would hope that they would be significantly different there. Well, that's interesting to get the update on where Distant Worlds 2 stands these days. So you're still playing your way through the Shakturi DLC. For folks that are interested, Sam is a very prolific poster in our forums. If you want to read more about what Sam thinks about how the game plays, that's the best place to keep up with. Sam, I'm assuming that's the best place for people to keep up with you continuing to explore the game and offering your thoughts as you go.
Correct. I hadn't really posted much in the in the forums, just because I was kind of waiting to talk about it tonight on the podcast, but henceforward I'll be talking about it more in the forums. Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, we're talking DW2 specifically, but obviously any of the games that you're noodling around with. But it sounds like we've got a DLC that's got some cool stuff to it that you're still working your way through. But even without the DLC, the improvements to the base engine have dramatically enhanced the game. For people that might have had problems with it when it was first released, it may be worth a second look now. Is that a fair summation?
Yes, it's definitely come a long way in the last 2 years.
Well, that begs another question, though. And is there any reason that you would go back to Distant Worlds 1?
For me personally, no. Distant Worlds 2, I think, has reached the point where it's on par with Distant Worlds 1.
So you would rather play Distant World 2. That's probably a good thing, though.
Yeah. I know, to be fair, I know some people still prefer the first game because it allows more open ship design. And don't ask me for the details on what the difference is, because I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I just know that the first game allows more freeform ship design. Personally, I'm not bothered by that. So for me, yes, the second game is now at the point where I enjoyed as much as the first one, and I don't have any real desire to go back.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Sam, question for you on DW2 with the latest release.
Yeah.
One of the things I was frustrated about was to play the largest available Galaxy out of the box, you had to have a 12-core CPU. Do you know if that is still a requirement for their largest Galaxy setting?
It is recommended for the largest Galaxy setting, yes.
Okay.
I have only been playing 1,000 to 1,500 star galaxies, and even those are a bit taxing on my computer later on.
So one of the things is DW2 does take advantage of multi-cores. I do know that I was trying to run the largest Galaxy settings with below specs, and it was not working. So I was just curious if those requirements were still in place or not with the latest release updates. And just for the record, Stellaris has its own performance problems also, but they're different. They don't require multi CPUs really. Their performance issues start coming on in mid game and are related more toward. I've heard two different things, and they're probably both accurate to some degree. One is the whole population model can weigh things down. The other piece is that if you have too many ships in the galaxy, the way they render the ship graphics, even though you're zoomed out at the galaxy level, impacts performance. And so a really large galaxy in Stellaris with a lot of ships can cause performance problems. But I was just curious about the DW2 needs, which is kind of disappointing in some ways, right? Because you're talking something that most people don't have. And right. Most people, what was really frustrating is right about the time DW2 came out, I upgraded just the CPU, and I just went with another 8-core, and then all of a sudden DW2 comes out and you start doing it, and it's like, oh, you need a 12-core to play here at the largest settings. I'm just like, that's not good. You know?
Yeah, I mean, you're not locked out of playing the largest galaxy settings, but you are warned against playing against it if you don't have a 12 CPU core.
From my experience, you should have been locked out. In all honesty, because no, I'm serious. When you hit the pause button and there were still things going on a couple of minutes later because it was still trying to catch up with everything, that told you that you had no chance of actually realistically playing at that setting.
Oof.
So, yeah, but I mean, it's just one of those things, right? That I like that they're pushing the envelope. It's just I'm just trying to figure out how to say this properly. It was just frustrating.
Yeah,
to get hit with that.
Yeah, it's really like, well, at that point, why even make a 2,000 star galaxy an option?
Well, I can see making the option. It's just you need to be locked out, right? Hey, you've only got an 8-core CPU. Realistically, you're going to have performance problems that's going to really kind of make this unplayable. So you're not even going to be able to do this right now.
Fair.
They should have gone, but that's all right. I was just curious if that had been changed or not.
There's also different play styles here too. Like I think Sam and Mike
Yes.
are both probably of the play style. They like those gigantic mega galaxies and all those stars. I'm just the opposite. I kind of like the smaller galaxies in smaller numbers of ships because I like to have an investment in these things. Like I want to know my colonies really well, and I want to know my ships by name. So it's I'll play these smaller galaxies, and I like the games that have smaller number of stars and smaller number of ships because you can kind of like guide it, and there's more narrative to your gameplay style. But I totally get I can understand why people would want the giant galaxies, and it should be an option in these games to have those.
Yeah, and you're right. It's totally your play style, right? I guess it's a galaxy. I want to make it feel like a galaxy, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I think DW2 does a better job than Stellaris on a large galaxy because you're not having to micromanage the planets so much, and you can go in and you can set the controls as to, hey, the AI can take care of building armies to defend the planets type deal, right? Or the AI can do this or that on its own. I don't need to go in there and micromanage it. A large galaxy, I think, is a lot more easy to handle in DW2 than in Stellaris.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. There's been attempts at getting the AI to manage construction or the building of facilities on the planets. It's hit and miss, especially if you're using mods.
Oh, for Stellaris?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's, I think, a common problem with 4Xs in general. I know when I used to play Civilization a lot, I would never let the city governor run anything because it was like real life. They're building harbors where you don't need them or something silly. And it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Everybody's making food and I want to make something else. And just like, turn that off.
Yeah, or building 20 farms when you already have
exactly.
ridiculous food surplus.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
I tend to be a big fan of production queues in all of the games I play where I'll set up the next 5 things I want to do and then come back to me when those 5 are done and we'll figure out what's next. But I do rarely turn over just wholesale city or area management to an AI because I've found it to be far more A than I.
Yeah, and another problem with these games, some of the earlier ones especially, is when you had city production like that, if you didn't queue up things in the production queue, they would default to like this, okay, now we're just going to produce food every turn. And if you weren't paying attention, your cities weren't growing and building things. They were just churning out food. And you're like, what is going on?
Yeah. I don't think that's been a problem recently for very many of those things. Some of the older ones, that was absolutely a fair critique.
Yeah.
But some of the recent ones, I don't think that's as much of an issue.
The lucky 13th season of Mentioned in Dispatches is made possible by our fantastic regimental patrons who joined our Patreon at the top level. The Armchair Dragoons would like to thank Michael Sunborg, Andy J, Brigadier Grey, Joseph Knorr, Fred Stogg, Matthew Rowe, Chet Bell, Hellcat6, Patrick Garrity, Stagger Wing, Kevin Bertram, Mike Quigley, and Fred too. Their support of the Regiment of Strategy Gaming helps us bring you the best strategy gaming articles, events, and this podcast. You can join us as a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/armchairdragoons.
Going back to the 4X space and tootling around the galaxies there. I know, especially OJ and Sam have had a bunch of time with Stellaris. Obviously, Sam circled back around to DW2. Outside of those 2 larger franchises, OJ, what other, if any, Space 4X series have you noodled around with lately? Like, don't go back 15, 20 years, but things that are sort of more current and on the market. Is there something else that you've noodled around with? And if so, was there something that particularly stood out to you about that game relative to the others?
Yep. So the first part of the answer is no, I have not had a chance to noodle around with anything. However, I have downloaded and installed the Beyond Astra demo.
Okay.
I have not had a chance to fire it up yet. It is on my to-do list here before long. Sam, I think you have played that already, haven't you?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I was the one who posted about it in the forums.
Yep. Yeah, and I was thinking there might have been something else along the similar lines, but it's not coming to my mind right at the moment. Scrolling through my my Steam list here, trying to see if it stands out at me, but it probably won't. But Sam, do you want to talk about it, Beyond Astra?
It looks promising, and I know Brant just posted. He just posted in the Discord that, and mentioned in the Tuesday Newsday that it's the Kickstarter is about to end. It's already been successfully funded. But yeah, it's looking good. Looks like an interesting combination of kind of Stellaris, Imperium Galactica 2, and even a dash of Spore in a way. He's kind of the developers combined some interesting different concepts and models together, and it's looking interesting. It is a real-time 4X, which is gonna turn off some people, but
Me.
yeah, I know. Yeah, I knew you were gonna be one of them, Mike.
Well, if it's pausable for it, or pausable real time, it's not quite as bad.
Well, and it is. It's clearly been modeled on games like Stellaris and Distant Worlds.
Yeah.
And you're going to have aspects like characters and leaders. It is going to have real-time ground battles. It's not going to be on a massive scale from what I've seen, but that's still something you don't see very often. That's one of the aspects where it reminds me of Imperium Galactica 2. Then the planets they do remind me of Spore. They're where they're that type of model, and you can build multiple cities on each planet, and you build out from them, and you can visibly see as you build things out from each city. It does suggest that the maps in Beyond Astra probably are not going to be huge, because otherwise micromanagement would become an absolute nightmare. But so it'll be interesting to see what directions exactly the developer does take this in by the time it's released.
Yeah, that sounds like it. So
there's one other that I have in my Steam library. It's about 5 years old, and I have not visited it for quite a while. And it's Interstellar Space Genesis. Sam, did you ever pitch that one?
Man, I haven't played that one in... It's close to a year myself now.
Yeah, it's got very positive reviews on Steam. I think it was one of those that when I got it, it hadn't been fully baked yet, and so I kind of noodled around with it for about a half an hour and said, okay, I'll come back to this here in a bit, and I just haven't had a chance to get back to it. And then there's another one that I don't know if this really falls into the 4X realm. It probably doesn't, the Fermi Paradox, but I don't know that really falls into a 4X type realm. I think that's something a little bit different. So...
yeah,
just threw it out there for people to look up if they want something out. Look at it in more detail.
I am a little curious as you decide, as you sit down and go, hey, I'm in the mood for some Space 4X action. Let me fire up a game and go get some playing in. If you're not doing if you're not doing a multiplayer something or specifically trying to work through something for a reason, but you're just kind of, it's the equivalent of channel surfing, right? Your Steam library surfing, looking for something to poke around at. What's the motivation to grab one game versus another, or pull one off the stack and go, all right, that's the one I feel like playing today? Mike, as you look at your Steam library, I mean, you see all those goose eggs for hours played. What is it that's going to grab you and say, all right, I need to go, I want to go start clicking around through this particular one? How do you pick and choose what you're going to do there?
Is that BB Mike or Mike?
BB Mike.
For me,
lately, the whole time, man.
For me, lately, it's easy. It's if I'm going to play, and like I said, I haven't played these games in a while, but if I'm going to play a Space 4X, I'm going to go back to one of the ones that I put time into already. It's getting rarer and rarer for me to say, I'm going to go look in the 900 games I've got, and I'm going to pluck out one of these unknown Space 4X and give it a whirl. And part of the problem there is because I've had such bad luck, and we talked about this in the forum, but I've had such bad luck with these, somebody comes out and says, oh, here comes the new Space 4X, turn-based, like Master of Orion, you're going to love it. And then they release it, and they just drop it, and they move to a different country, never update it, and it's just garbage or whatever. And you're like, okay, there goes $20. I think I made a list of those games in the forum, if I remember correctly. So if I'm going to play a game, usually I'm going to go to something like...
And a lot of those were bad, not going to lie.
Right? But if I'm going to play Space 4X, I'm probably going to pick something like Galactic Civilizations or Stellaris. Horizon's another one that's kind of one of the ones I just kind of mentioned that kind of got released, but it actually was a fairly decent game. It was kind of flew under the radar. And actually, Interstellar Space Genesis, I really like that game. The problem I think with it was when you start that game, it starts so slowly because you're building up very slow, and by the time you get things rolling, you've lost interest.
Yep.
That was a neat one. Another one that I just remembered was what was it called? It was the cartoony looking one. Man, what was it called? Stars and Shadow. Stars and Shadow.
Yep.
So that was a fun one. And like the other one I can think of is Endless Space. Endless Space 2 was another one I would go back to. And then there's the old ones that sometimes I'm in the mood to play Master of Orion 2, or I might want to play Birth of the Federation, and I'll grab one of those and go.
Okay. OJ, obviously, like, you fire up Civ 6 when you get the alert that it's your turn in one of those multiplayer campaigns. But beyond that, if you're rocketing into outer space to go try and find something to explore, is there a particular deciding factor that makes you grab one game over another, or do you just sort of throw the dart at the dartboard and go, all right, that one?
Well, I think for a while now it's been Stellaris. Simply because A, I'm more familiar with it, and B, waiting for DW2 to mature some more. However, and Sam and I have talked about this in the forums recently, my frustration with Stellaris, and kind of along with a lot of the Paradox games, is the rate that they make upgrades to these games, whether it's DLC or just enhancements. And so Stellaris has a caretaker team that's tasked with making improvements to the base game at times, whether it's bug fixes or quality of life improvements, or maybe just some changes to try and take a particular piece of the game and make it more enjoyable. And so the problem is if you're sitting here and you're playing with a dozen different mods, they come out with these things every 5 months, it seems like. And if you're not sitting there banging away at your game, consistently, you may not get through. You have trouble getting through an entire game. So there may be times when I fire it up 3 or 4 nights a week for a couple of weeks in a row and have it a couple of hours, and I may not be able to revisit it for a couple of weeks just because other things come up and get in the way. And then all of a sudden you see, oh, hey, in 4 weeks we're going to come up with this update and it's going to do this and this and this, and you're like, well, then it's going to take a week or so for the mods to maybe flush out. When their last DLC came out, it took one of the mods at least a month, and it was a major mod. You just kind of say, well, do I want to go back and revisit this now, knowing that I'm not even going to get halfway through my game? So
that's part of the reason why I drifted back to board games, partly because of that.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. Distant Worlds 2 doesn't have that issue right now. I mean, obviously they're putting out patches for bug fixes, but they don't have the mod support right now, and they're just not putting out new content as fast. I don't know. I don't know if Paradox has ever really thought about this, that, hey, we're putting out content so fast, people are using mods. It's been one of the big drawing factors of the Paradox games, not just Stellaris, but their other major titles. But we go out here and make these changes, then all of a sudden the mod community has to jump through hoops to adapt, especially if a mod is, say, concentrating on one particular function within a game, and all of a sudden, oh, we've overhauled that, and now the mod has to be rewritten or abandoned, in which case then the game that you were playing is null and void.
Well, and I don't know if you saw that, OJ, but I did post in the forums that the developers apparently they did respond to, I guess there's been a fair amount of complaints from players, and I think modders alike, and did say that they're going to be slowing down the pace at which they release major updates, because they were coming out on average roughly every 3 months. It was 4 a year.
I did not see that yet, but that's good to hear, right? I mean, and again, there's a difference between a bug fix and an enhancement change to the game itself, right?
Right, yeah, between a minor patch and a major update.
Yeah. Now, if Paradox came out and said, hey, we're overhauling how we handle populations because we recognize that that's slowing down mid and late games in large galaxies, right? That's one thing, right? Because that's, I think, to a lot of players, that's a significant issue that if they could address it, would be really welcomed, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's just, okay, did that change really need to come out this time, or could it have waited another 3 months as part of another update? And while we're on this track, kudos for Paradox. They are supporting these games for a decade or more down the road, right? It's not, like Mike said, some of these developers, hey, I paid $20 for it, and then they disappeared with an unfinished game. Paradox is not that way. You can like them, you can not like them, but you got to at least respect their willingness to stick through most of their games long term.
Yep. Of course, they are able to do that because of their long-term DLC policy as well, which some people don't care for. But that is part of that is literally how they're able to afford to do long-term support for their games.
Which even if I get them on discount on sales, I'll still eventually pick up the DLC, even for things that I don't put a whole lot of time in, simply because I recognize that, hey, you know what? I understand this, and I want to support them because I may want to turn around and start revisiting some of these games at some point. I've been noodling around with some EU again lately. I pick up Hearts of Iron 4 once in a while and fire it up. So yeah, I want to keep these games going. I saw somebody a comment actually a couple days ago, and the comment was along the lines of, "You want me to sit through a 10-hour movie? No way, I'm not going to do that. But hey, we're going to release this series in 10 episodes. We're going to release it all in one night." And people are like, "Yeah, I'm going to sit there and stream the whole thing in 10 hours." It's like, it's the same thing, right? So I kind of thought, well, that kind of goes along with DLCs, right? I wouldn't pay $300 for a game that had all this stuff from day one, but I'll fork out $300 over 10 years for it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, people complain about how expensive Paradox games are with all the DLC, but when you compare to the number of hours people tend to spend playing Paradox games, it's like you're getting your money's worth.
Yeah, let me tell you, you take a look at, again, the things you've played the most in your Steam library, the number of hours that you have in them, divided by the cost of the game, and what do you have for those? For the cost per hour for what it is that you played, it's going to be a minuscule cost per hour for those things that you've played the most.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
for most people.
Officially within the Steam library, I've got
BB Mike is an exception.
Officially, Stellaris, I've got 3,300 hours in. I will say this though, I know I don't truly have 3,300 hours of playing time into it. There's been times where I fired it up at times working at home, and I'll leave it set there, paused, and I'll come downstairs and I'll work for a few hours, and I'll go back upstairs for 10 minutes and advance it a little bit more and play around with something. So there's some of that time is sitting there in a pause mode, but.
Oh, same. I mean, I know I talked about in the forums how I'm approaching 8,000 hours in Stellaris, but it's not truly that much. Probably a good 500 hours at least of that are paused while I ate dinner or.
Yep. But still, how many hours was it saying, Sam? 8,800, you said?
I'm coming up on 8,000 hours in Stellaris officially.
Okay, so 8,000 hours. Even if you take 10% of that, that's 800 hours potentially sitting there on pause. So back out. Now you've got 7,200 hours of actually button mashing in Stellaris for what it is that you paid. The relative, even assuming the game and all the DLC was $720, right? Just to keep the math easy. You paid $1 for every 10 hours worth of game. If I'm doing the math right, I wouldn't trust my math either. But still, you paid $1 for every 10 hours worth of game. Like, go to your local multiplex and ask how much of a movie you can get for $1. You're definitely getting your entertainment dollars value out of this.
Oh yeah, no question.
I can't. If I go into Steam and I click on like the Ultimate Bundle and say, okay, what's the, what would everything cost me if I bought it new today? Because I've already got everything, and so it's not showing me the. Oh, here we go. $359. It looks like if you bought everything today from scratch
for Stellaris.
For Stellaris, and I think that is just all the expansion stuff. I don't think that was the base game. Base game is probably what, $50, $40 for the base game. So let's call $400. So Sam, if you had 4,000 hours and you're talking $10 an hour, I think. Am I doing my math?
I think it's the other way around.
Yes, 10 cents.
Yeah, $1 per 10 hours.
Yeah,
so 10 cents an hour.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, that's a hell of a value over the long haul. Now, yes, you've got to commit to one game for that much time in order for the that math to work out. But I think most of us have our little personal favorite games that math has come out in our favor through whatever ratio of time spent versus, money spent. For me, it's the Civ series. I'm not as big on the space stuff, but I do nothing but salute those of you that have found your game and are happy to sort of ride that game and off you go. There's nothing wrong with that. So, Mike, I don't want to leave you totally out in the cold with the board game stuff right now. What's the latest Space 4X board game that you've taken a look at and picked up and wanted to start noodling around with?
The newest one that I picked up?
Yes. Is that it, or is it one of the expansions like the Space Empires 4X expansions that GMT's spitting out?
The last space game that I bought was the big packaged SPI? Is it Outreach? Outreach, I think it is. That's the latest one that I purchased. So that's one I've got to look through.
I've got one.
What you got, Mike?
Starfire.
Starfire.
So, for those that don't know, I actually didn't purchase it recently. I bought it a few years ago, but they have just been sending out the release candidate for the 6.03 release of Starfire, which is a tabletop game.
Okay.
Very old tabletop game.
Yeah. I mean, its roots go back into the late 70s, I think.
Yeah.
So it can be kind of two games in one. You can play it as a tactical game, but there is a strategic multi-system galaxy rule set that comes with it also. So you don't have to do that. You could just play the tactical game. But if you're playing the Galaxy version, then whenever you get into combat, then you're using the tactical rule set. It's a very detailed game.
So are you saying this new one, because the old one, you had the tactical game, but the strategic game was a totally different game that you had to purchase. So is this an all-in-one thing now?
So Solar Starfire comes with everything, all in one. The Solar Fire rule set, which is the latest set of rules.
We have to check that out.
$587.
I will not check that out.
Scratch it. 587 pages. Excuse me. Yeah, scratch that dollars. I don't know where that came from. I don't know. It's like maybe $40 or $50. You'd have to double check. This release came out free for anybody that had purchased the previous version, and I don't know how far back they'll go on honoring previous purchases, but
I mentioned it last night on our as we were recording this. It was last night, but on the show that Mike and I did on the catalogs, that I did pick up a copy of Freedom in the Galaxy when we were on the big Noble Knight pilgrimage. That was one of the ones I wanted to get there because when you're going to a store like Noble Knight. Not that there's a lot of stores like Noble Knight out there, but when you've got the option to check out multiple copies of a game from the inventory, you can then take a look at the quality of the components in there. And so what I asked them to do was, hey, can you grab me like 3 of these off the shelf, the 3 highest graded ones off the shelf? Because I was looking at the Avalon Hill versions. Those were the ones they had in stock. And the Avalon Hill mounted map boards for Freedom in the Galaxy were notorious for some warping issues. And so I wanted to take a look at the quality of the maps in the box and was able to get the one that had the least amount of warping, and it really was pretty solid condition. The rest of the game was unpunched. A couple of the cards had been cut apart, but the counters and everything else were all unpunched and was all still intact. My hope is over the holidays this year to be able to get Freedom of the Galaxy to the table and actually play some. It is not a simple game. It is a fairly robust game, but it actually hangs together fairly well. There's a bunch of different subsystems that all in the game that all interact pretty well. And so it's just a chance to kind of noodle around with that and see what I can do. That's one I'm looking forward to poking around with. But I was happy to have the option to find a good quality one. Looking in the BGG database, which I know is not always perfect, but usually pretty close, Starfire was showing as 79 for its first release.
Okay.
And Outreach was showing as 76. Not that it's a competition. I'm just taking a look and seeing what all was there. So,
I'm sorry, real quick. One more comment on Starfire before we move on.
Yeah.
They do have a Discord server that is active for people that may be looking. They actually have people hosting and running multiplayer games off their Discord server. So if you're somebody that used to play Starfire, wants to get back into it, you might want to look up the Discord server and introduce yourself and see if you can get into a game.
Well, that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, no complaining there. There's been a handful of 4X space tabletop games show up on crowdfunding over the last 4 to 6 months or so. Worthington had launched one. We saw Rock Manor Games, which was a subsidiary of Tabletop Tycoon, had launched one and then pulled it back because the feedback from the customers in the campaign was that they wanted some changing to some of the components. So they're going to relaunch the campaign with those component changes. We've seen the Star Trek Ascendancy one is out there right now. There's a variety of these that have shown up on crowdfunding, plus the usual GMT P500s, the Compass Games pre-orders / Kickstarter as a last-minute pre-order tool. As you're looking at those, BB Mike, are there any of those that you jumped on or looked at and took an intentional pass for a reason? Or, am I just describing things you didn't even know were out there?
Well, first and foremost, All Good Things, the final expansion to Space Empires 4X, should be at the printer this month. So I'm looking forward to getting my hands on that at some point. So without a doubt, that was one I backed.
That's the GMT one. That's part of that GMT series.
The Star Trek Ascendancy thing, I looked at that. I've never played Star Trek Ascendancy. I've tried to avoid it because I'm not a miniatures guy really. But I took a look at the link you sent me, and I have to say that does look interesting. I may have to check that out. But you're saying that's actually it's out now or Kickstarter or
it's on. I think it's on GameFound was the platform. Sam may chime in here and correct me if I'm wrong because I know he was ogling it also.
That's right.
Where I decided to tease him in one of the posts there. So it's still a live campaign. One of the differences between Kickstarter and GameFound is that GameFound, after the campaign itself has closed, it automatically goes into late pledge mode where additional pledges won't contribute to stretch goals or anything like that. The price probably changes, but you can still order through the same mechanism on GameFound. Whereas Kickstarter, they'll give you a message that says, "Did you miss the campaign? Go here to this other place and go, get in a late order or whatever." So you can jump on them a little later through GameFound.
So there's still time to spend money, you're saying?
Yeah, there's always time to spend money. We're always going to help people spend some money on things.
And then I can't think of anything else that I certainly didn't do the Stellaris board game Kickstarter. Thank God. I can't think of anything else though that I have on order.
I think you said you're closing in on 8,000 hours of playing the Stellaris computer game.
Yes.
The real question is, will the Stellaris board game hit 8,000 days of being late?
At this point, I'm not sure if it's going to be shipped before the heat death of the universe.
Yeah. I posted the screenshot in the forums. When was it? It was supposed to have shipped back in like 2022 or something.
April of 2022.
Yeah. And they're still writing card content.
Yep. Yeah. Nothing's even supposed to go into production until at least March.
Yeah.
So question, Sam, just in your opinion, is this Stellaris computer game to board game having the opposite issues that Civilization has from going from a board game to a computer game, in that trying to go from the Stellaris computer game down to a board game, you just really can't get it. It's too complex of a computer game, I think, to easily get into a board game. Civilization is still, after 6 releases, is still pretty much a copy of the board game, right? They've never really taken advantage of, hey, we have this great thing called a computer system that can do all these great things. Do you think that's where they really got hung up at, is trying to mimic too much of what's going on in the computer?
I think that's at least part of the problem, yes. And maybe is very well the main problem. And Academy Games didn't realize that they were biting off more than they could chew, and thus was giving unrealistic deadlines, which then went into them not communicating with the backers, which led to everyone being upset.
Right.
I think that's what kept me from joining into the Kickstarter. Just that, Mike. It was like I couldn't see in my mind how are you going to take that computer game and boil it down to a board game and not end up with something like Space Empires 4X, which you already have? I mean, yeah, you could maybe have some different mechanics and things, but I couldn't see distilling that detailed computer game down to a board game successfully.
I could see them doing it with something like EU or Crusader Kings, just off the premise that your maps are pretty well set to start with, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole great thing about Stellaris and DW2 is the random galaxy generation at the beginning. You just have no idea what you're going to have as a starting point, or where you're going to be located. Yes, I mean, I mean, I see on Reddit every once in a while somebody will post something. Yeah, so I started right next to this Fallen Empire, and I'm boxed in already with 5 systems that I can get to, and then I can't go any further. But there's just so many mechanics going on there, and then how the planetary development goes and stuff, which I think those would probably be pretty easy, but I don't know. It's just
but you hit up another good point, Mike, and that's something like Europa Universalis, which was released as a board game, and a lot of people liked it. But it's look how huge that is, and how many people are still playing it. Because to play that thing, you need table real estate, and how long does it take to set that thing up, and then how long are you going to keep it on the table? So even if it turns out to be a good game, a board game, is it going to get played?
Well, and is it a true board game, or is it going to be like what we're seeing with Starfire, where it's more of a hex and paper hex and counter game?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, hey, look, man, people play all the different versions of Twilight Imperium still, and that's that's a weekend long commitment in some cases there. So it's the fact that it's a longer or more complex or more involved game shouldn't surprise anybody. There's obviously a market for those things out there.
No, BB Mike brings up a good point, though. I mean, I've long since wondered if we're basically just going to get a Stellaris flavored Twilight Imperium.
Yeah.
Right, basically what it's going to end up being.
You could show up at Origins and go over to the Academy Games booth and take a look at the demo copy and decide for yourself.
And again, like I said, even if say they duplicate it as a board game, why would I want to spend all that time and space setting up that board game? I just go to the computer and click.
And
play
it.
Well, now here's something though. Tabletop Simulator does have the EU board game as a workshop mod that you can go out there and get.
Yeah, that's good as long as they support that type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've never really looked at the board game, but just looking at the pictures from the workshop, it looks like they're just focused on Europe, anyways. It doesn't look like they're going into Asia and so forth. I mean, it looks like there's some pieces, but not the detailed that there is for Europe. So it looks like they've abstracted some things.
I bet there's not a random New World option, is there?
No, it doesn't look like you could play like China or India. It looks like what may be there for outside of Europe is more for colonization and trade purposes, and not for, hey, I'm gonna make the King Dynasty great again or type thing.
I can't make Transylvania,
which is fine. Yeah. Which is really going to make it even more interesting. What are they going to do with Stellaris? How are they going to actually make something that the first functional core piece of the product is a random galaxy generator?
Guys, we're a little over an hour here. We've covered a lot of space. We didn't cover a lot of ground. We covered a lot of space, but we talked a little bit about Sam's explorations with the newest incarnation of DW2. A couple of the different games that we've played around with, and some that we have in our Steam library that haven't even really touched. And we covered a handful of tabletop games. And so I think we've fully discussed a variety of Space 4X stuff. The truth is, we could go on for, another 4 hours easily if we just let the thing run. But somebody named Brant's got to edit all this together for public release at some point. And that's going to take a little bit. So I think we'll spare the audience me going a little punchy trying to edit all this together and call it for tonight. But I do want to make sure that we'll put this episode back on the books for the spring, which will give Sam a little more time to get a little further into DW2, for OJ to possibly come back to DW2 and maybe noodle around with it a little bit, especially now that you're done with your college courses. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And for Mike to maybe get one or more of his tabletop Space 4X games in the door and hopefully on the table and poke around with it a little bit. And for Brant to continue ignoring the fact that Space 4X games exist. So,
there's also fantasy 4X games, Brant. Come on.
Yes,
there are, but that in and of itself is its own episode or two. And so again, I don't have a problem with coming back around to talk about those things. I'm happy to do it, but we did want to keep the focus a little more on the space ones for tonight in this particular episode, because we had a couple of things we definitely wanted to make sure we covered. And so if we want to put a fantasy 4X one or a historical 4X one on the books for next season, totally fine. Let's do it and let's see what we come up with. But for tonight, I think we'll probably wrap here and let folks continue the conversations in the forums with us or on the Discord server or any of the other places you can find us and engage with us. If you're hitting this episode on our website, we do have the link tree over on the right column, the right sidebar for our website. So you can go hit that and see all the different places that you can find the Dragoons and engage with us on different things. So guys, Mike, thank you for coming back again for, co-host duties. I appreciate it. And OJ, thank you for popping in here again and joining us here. And it's very cool that the college courses are done. That's awesome, man. Take a victory.
Did it all before I was 56 years old.
Yeah. Hey, dude, man, it doesn't matter when you get it done. You got it done. That's the cool part. Hey,
That's true. That's true.
take a victory lap, man. Get an extra smooch from the wife, whatever it is. It's totally awesome, and you deserve the kudos and plaudits for it. And Sam, thank you for unpacking enough of your belongings in your new place to be able to hop on here and join us. So
thank you for being there to answer our questions about Space 4X games in the forum.
Yeah.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
For the audience, if you do want to continue this discussion on the Space 4X games, we've got folks who are in the Discord who can answer the questions, but quite frankly, the majority of the 4X conversation with the Dragoons does happen in our forums, and that's really the best place for that for that interchange and that interplay there, because that's where we've got folks like Sam and Gus and a couple of the others who are regular Space 4X gamers that can all jump in there and more easily answer some questions or point you to whatever resources or make recommendations. That's probably the best place to engage for this specific topic. So with that, audience, we want to thank you very much for joining us and being here. Appreciate the panel being here with us as a part of all this. We are winding down season 13, but we will be back after the holidays with season 14 because we just kind of can't help ourselves. But in the meantime, we appreciate everybody being here. We'll catch you next time on another episode of Mentioning Dispatches.